Welcome to Pivoting to Web3 podcast, where experts break down AI, blockchain, and tech shaping our future. I'm Donna, and today's guest has insights you won't want to miss. Let's dive in. Welcome to Pivoting to Web3 podcast, and today we have Jason Padgett, and he's a senior partner and human AI collaboration coach. And that's what really attracted me to Jason, because I want to know, and people want to know, is AI going to replace them? And it's not. It's going to enhance who you are. And he's going to talk a lot about that. But let me get back to where he's at now at Phoenix Solutions Group, where he guides organizations through the digital transformation and puts some balance with the behavior, the humans, and the human-centered innovation. I'm not going to go on about this. I'm excited about having Jason. He's going to tell us how he really ended up getting into Phoenix Solutions Group and really looking at human-centered approach when you implement AI into your organization. So Jason, say hello to our audience and yours, and tell us a little bit about you and how you got into the AI collaboration, AI-centered human approach.
Well, thank you very much. You make me sound better than I think I could make myself sound, but you and I share a lot in common. We talked a little bit before the show about democratizing technology and access to technology, and so I guess I'll try to keep it short, but I'll share more of my story than I normally do. So I'm a person in long-term recovery from substance use disorder, and I went to Indiana University Health. I was hoping to get a degree in psychology back in the 90s and then go work for the FBI as a profiler long before Silence of the Lambs ever came out, when it was really just a research job and everyone knew that. But drugs and alcohol took me off that path, and for a lot of years I was just kind of out there doing my thing, working in the restaurant industry, commercial fishing, did a little stint in the Marine Corps. Not that Marines drink a whole lot, but I was all right there, and ended up in a rehab center back here in Indiana in 2006, and stayed in the restaurant industry for quite some time. And then 10 years ago, I had kind of a bump in the road that really changed my life and set me on the path of working in behavioral health. At the time, the idea that there are multiple pathways to recovery, that not just the 12 step, which is a very, very impactful program, but that wasn't for everybody, and that there were a lot of different ways to recover, was becoming more acceptable. It had been acceptable on the East Coast for a while, but the Midwest catches up slowly. And so I entered into I got lucky and started managing peer recovery coach programs, helping individuals who were in recovery go out and help people who needed recovery leverage resources. And that was kind of grant funded and ended up under an EMS agency. And I first met my now partner in business and still my employer from that side, Nate Metz, who is excellent entrepreneur, and just his whole idea of he wants to buck tradition bias and question new ways to work the system. And so I got in there, and I felt like finally, for once, I was making an impact on life. I felt much better, but I always still had that like looming, I wish I would have got a college degree. No matter how well I do, I learned to do really well in digital marketing and change management and project management. And there was still kind of this little thing in my gut that was like, but it sucks that you never got a degree, because if you had an MBA, you could be making a whole lot more money and probably a lot more impact. And then I went to work for the Salvation Army for 18 months as a development director. And that was when ChatGPT launched. And I remember getting on ChatGPT skeptically. And I've always been a huge fan. I know there's a million Simon Sinek fans out there. I'm a huge fan of Marcus Buckingham, who's a British guy who talks about how you should really work to your strengths and the things that you enjoy doing, and then find somebody who offsets your weaknesses rather than wasting time trying to improve those weaknesses. And I have found that to be a very effective way to work. And my aha moment with ChatGPT was, wait a minute, this computer program can pretty much offset any weakness that I have. And the more that I learned to use it, the more I realized that, yes, if you have a subject matter domain expertise, you're going to be able to use large language models and multimodal language models and reasoning models better than somebody who doesn't. But at the same token, like, I don't always have to have a whole team around me to take care of the things that I am weak at. I can actually build those things or augment those things alongside. And that's where I see this whole magnification of humans with the collaboration with AI. And I just was set on fire with that. Um, I'm a bit of an obsessive, so I probably have studied AI, since it's launched in that framework, uh, at least a quarter of my day every day since 2022. And again, I started to get a little bit disgruntled at the fact that the only place that I really see, at least here in the Midwest, people trying to adapt or adopt this technology is at the enterprise level, big businesses. When the nonprofit space and small to medium sized businesses and startups could really be leveraging this technology. I don't think AI is going to replace humans anytime in the near future at all. I do think that the landscape of work, I think that there will be jobs 5 years from now that are as foreign to you and I as podcasting would have been to Harriet Tubman. And so I think that if you're not starting to explore AI, someone who is may replace you someday.
Hmm. That's a really very interesting comment. So with that said, when you mentioned the enterprise level, before we go into the nonprofits and the smaller brands and businesses, when you're at the enterprise level, what is it that you do in conversation with your client that helps get them ready for AI? Or how do you know they're ready for AI? Do you have a process or a questionnaire or assessment, or is it just conversation? How do you approach that so you know how to balance it out?
I honestly don't operate in the enterprise space. It's more the nonprofit, small to medium sized business, workforce development space that I operate in. And now
Okay.
I have noticed that a, a lot of the statistics say that enterprise level AI projects are only effective or create a good ROI about 15% of the time. I can tell you that my guess on that is because they were doing AI just to do AI rather than identifying a process or procedure where AI could either magnify their impact or automate something that allowed humans to do something that was more impactful.
So when working with workforce development and AI literacy, what is it that you're seeing the common trends, and how can we overcome what you've been able to view and start moving the needle forward?
I think just getting the conversation going and getting people into these tools. So I'll tell you about probably the most fun thing that I've done recently. I just got done teaching an 8 session, 1 month course for a retirement lifetime learning association near Purdue University.
Oh,
So most of them were retired Purdue professors, or at least half of them were. They were more in the humanities side than the STEM side. So, had it been the STEM side, they would have been over my head. But it was in the humanities side, and I assumed, being most of them are baby boomers, I shouldn't have assumed this, but I assumed there was going to be a lot of pushback and a lot of skepticism, right? What I really found was, aside from they're all still afraid that every kid is going to cheat on their homework and use AI to write all the rest of their papers, outside of that, they were really curious and really wanted to know, like, what's hype and what's not. And I think that's one thing that we fail to realize when we're in this space is what we hear going on all the time is not exactly what the public hears going on all the time, right? So, like, just for a small, for instance, when they launched GPT 4.0 and everybody was giblifying their images, making Studio Ghibli
mm-hmm.
images of themselves because Sam Altman did that. Every podcast I listened to, all the AI news, like, that's all anyone could talk about. It was melting down open AI servers. The general public didn't know what that was even happening in my experience, right? I would show people, I would giblify an image, and I don't usually play along with those, but it was kind of fun. And I would show it to somebody, to be like, "Oh, that's really cool. Like, what gave you that idea?" And I'm like,
Yeah, I'm curious on what melting down, what I'm not sure if I understand exactly, and if the audience understands exactly what that means.
so when they first released ChatGPT 4 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, right?
Right.
It has a new image generator in it. Dolly is no longer, it's now a native image generator, which is far better than Dolly, which was the image generator that has been in Chat GPT
Mm-hmm.
since they first launched, and it makes all those spaceshipy looking images that
Right.
you
Mhm.
just know Dolly made,
You
right?
just
Well,
know it
this,
was made by, yeah.
yes, yes. Well, this new image generator is phenomenal. I mean, it can make infographics with as many words on it as you want. But one of the things that trended amongst techies on Twitter and in Silicon Valley and in the general AI community was taking an image of yourself and asking ChatGPT to recreate it in the design of Studio Ghibli, which is like the Pixar of Japan of anime.
Okay.
And the gentleman that runs, he's like in his 80s, that runs Studio Ghibli, hates AI. So it was kind of a slap in the face to him. But so many people did that over a 24 to
Oh,
72 hour period that it actually like melted some servers at OpenAI. There were so, and they had just as many people sign up for Chat GPT over that in a 24-hour period as they initially had in the first year that they had signed up.
wow.
Yeah. So it was pretty crazy.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for that explanation. So, well, let me ask you this. When you connect the gap between AI and human-centered balance, how do you go about doing that piece when you're talking to the nonprofits or smaller business? Can you paint a picture on how that takes place? So, what are you doing differently at Phoenix Solutions Group versus what some other folks might be doing around data, data, data? You hear a lot about data.
Mhm.
Um, and when I met you and I looked at your background, I felt like you were doing some things differently that people need to be aware of. Can you give us some insight on that?
Certainly, I appreciate it because I'm not a numbers guy. I love to write, I love marketing, I love creating, and so that was another thing that I loved about AI is it does make data and processing data accessible to someone who's not particularly numbers oriented, right? So, but by that token, I think in order to get the general public or smaller businesses to leverage AI and to really start to explore this, they have to have their own Chat GPT moment, right? They have to have their own wow, I can't believe the power of this technology moment. So when I first started working with some of our recovery coaches, and one of our peer recovery coaches has actually written a choose your own adventure, like Dungeons and Dragons style book using AI that he animated, automated, and put out, and it's all about like the 8 dimensions of health.
Mm-hmm.
It's all this like self-care mental health stuff that's probably going to reach a population that it would never have reached if you didn't have it in that format, and that he would never, he spent 2/3 of his life in prison, like he would never have had the tools or the resources to create something like that, right? So I just sit down with a business or with an individual and say, what do you love to do first? Like, what are you really good at? Because I think what I first realized, my again, Nate Matt's my boss. He loves to paint, right? And
Mm-hmm.
when image generators first came out, and it was the first thing I introduced him to, I was amazed at how much better images he could get out of an image generator than my non-artistic uh, hands could get and mind could get. So I quickly realized like this amplifies what you're good at, and you can really show someone, well, if you like art, if you like to do this or that, like let's just explore what some of these tools can do to amplify you, and then help them start to wrap their mind around, okay, what don't you like doing? And I think that's when the conversation, once you identify some of the things that a company or an individual wants to stop doing, that's when the conversation becomes more interesting, because in healthcare, we're very process oriented. But in general, a lot of businesses, including nonprofit space, in my experience, like you don't really have a flow chart map of what any job or process looks like in your job the way that you do in manufacturing or in many healthcare organizations because it's so necessary to track data. So you have to then identify, okay, well, what does that process actually look like?
Mm.
Now, what informs that? And that's where the data conversation starts to come in and make more sense to someone who's not data friendly. Like, if you were doing that, what would you need to know, both inside and outside your business's system, in order to effectively do that? Okay, then that's the data that we're going to need to have in order to automate this process. Now, let's talk about the fact that shadow use is probably happening in most of these companies anyway. So I really like to start with, let's build a basic AI policy so that people can come out of the shadows and you're not putting your business at risk, but they have the green light to work with each other and start to learn and play with these tools together.
So Jason, when you look at the nonprofits, we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording. When you look at the nonprofits and the smaller companies, but let's just talk about the nonprofits. That's near and dear to my heart.
Mhm.
What do you think is going to take to get them to pay attention to AI and really start utilizing it more in their process, in their flow, and just start using it more internally? What do you think is really going to take? What should we do? What should I do?
I, I don't know. I think that all of what's going on in America right now around grant funding and whatnot may force them to, and that's not really how I wanted to see that happen. But I will tell you, it amazes me. So one of the things that I really have specialized at when I first wanted to start making some decent money off of AI, right, is creating like a custom chat bot that is completely trained on a company's voice, tone, and style, whether it be a custom GPT or inside of a playground like Sim Theory, where you can have call multiple models. But I can definitely build something that will produce newsletters, blogs, Facebook, Instagram, all of that, that's trained on a company that sounds just like it and that needs very little adjustment. The one that I built for the community paramedicine company, like it could actually read the picture. It would have I had a picture of one of our recovery coaches in front of a Narcan Malox box
Mm-hmm.
that was outside of a recovery residence. And I was like, write a blog post about this. And it knew from the training data, but it knew where that recovery residence was, what they do, what the Nalox box was, that she worked for us, our phone number. I mean, I could do all of that. And they hate that a human being is not doing it. I'm like, I love marketing, right? But why, if there's three people wearing five hats in a small nonprofit, it seems to me like the marketing one is not the most important one, not the digital marketing one. Maybe the going out and actually talking to donors. Now, maybe you can spend a little more time in front of individual donors in a one-on-one conversation or group conversations instead of writing Facebook posts and newsletters, right? And then when you multiply like what Salesforce and some of those have started to explore, eventually just think about how powerful it would be. Eventually you will be able to tailor every newsletter you send out of a nonprofit to the client profile that's in that CRM. So if Donna loves our children's program at the Salvation Army and Larry loves our church more, that's more what he loves the support of, and Jane loves what we do with families through Pathway of Hope, like we can tailor that, not we, but an algorithm without any effort can tailor the newsletters that go to them so that they see what's relevant to them. To me, that is so much power as a development director. But I bring that up to nonprofits, and I've had one, ironically, that's underneath the Catholic Church. You mentioned working with the Catholic Church. I had one who took me up on that. They were a rural healthcare organization housed under the Catholic Church, and they got some pushback from it was a hospital group at the church, but they did take me up on it. So how do we get them to understand this? I somehow we have to normalize it, and somehow we have to make them realize that it's not about inauth- being inauthentic. It's not about replacing people. It's about better using our time. It's about buying back some of our time for stuff that only humans can do that machines can't.
So do you think it's really an issue about the morals and ethics that really concern some of the nonprofits, that it's not human? Or do you feel it's more the technology and lack of understanding? Or because we've just come from a different generation and culture and there needs to be a mindset shift?
Yes, yes, and yes. Can I take it from an education perspective? Because
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
where it frames easiest for me. If you look at K through 12 education, right, the current AI landscape for K through 12 education is a couple of things that they're using it for, and a couple of things that they're really worried about, right? So the use cases, translation tool is phenomenal. I spent my elementary school years in El Paso, Texas, where the classrooms were half Hispanic and half Caucasian, right? And if we would have been able to have the teachers, if the kid could have had an earbud in and had a translation to their native language, that would have saved everybody a lot of time and trouble. Personalized tutors, chatbots, again, is being embraced. So if someone has a learning disability, I think there's the is it the Con Institute? I don't know. One of the institutes is starting to explore how to give a kid a custom chatbot that can help them learn from their learning perspective, right? And then the fears are, well, they're going to use it to cheat on everything, and we can't, they're not going to learn, they're not going to know how to write anymore. They're not. I mean, we still know how to do math, and the calculator's been around for a long time, but
Mhm.
I still think that all of that is framing things completely wrong. I think that these tools are going to completely change the way that these kids do work. And the way that I'll frame it, the way that I always frame this is, imagine when you and I don't think we're that much apart in age. When we were little kids, if we were at a Christmas party and they asked us what we wanted to be when we grew up, and one of us said a movie producer or a music producer, right? Most of the adults would have giggled and said, okay, you go do that. And then the mean uncle that drinks too much would have pulled us aside and told us how unrealistic that was, right? But it's not unrealistic anymore, because with these tools, kids of very little means who truly learn how to use them within the next 2 years will be able to make feature length films. They will be able to produce music. I mean, we've already seen the democratization of things like podcasts and streaming shows. That is going to be amplified into every industry going forward. And I think we need to be getting these tools in the hands of children and letting them show us what they can do, rather than trying to fit these tools into an outdated education system that was built for the days when most people worked in factories.
That's an interesting way to look at that. It really is. It has a vision and a dream, and everybody has a dream. And with a dream and AI, you can accomplish the dream. That I have been able to see. And that's a good way to really look at that. So thank you so much. So when you're looking at the AI and ethics and governance and just everything that's happening, where does the responsibility really lie? Do you think with the organization, or how do we end up flushing that out in regards to responsibilities and handling it in a responsible way?
That's a big question, right? I more and more have started to buy into the open source idea that millions of eyes on things and a lot of feedback has a lot better outcome long term in the future than a small number of people having all the control and say over these things. I will say that I do like seeing institutions like big universities exploring things like this, because I feel like there's a lot less bias that comes out of a research center on in a university than there is out of government or industry. Government and industry usually have some reason to bend or twist how something comes out to their in their favor, whereas pure researchers, I don't feel like do that. I love Dario Amodei, and I like Anthropic, which is the Claude producer. They're very much about safe AI use, but I also believe the issue right now is I really don't even think that we have any idea how advanced China is. And so this AI arms race, I don't really think is a joke. I think it could be detrimental whether or not we keep up with China in developing AI. So how do we do that safely and effectively? A wing and a prayer. Uh, Start supporting people who aren't just entertainers but actually have our best interests in mind. I think that's um, it's a very difficult question. I will say, so you asked me the macro one. I was ready for the micro one. So when it comes to bias, like in HR software and things like that using AI, I think the thing that we forget as humans is you can identify those biases in an algorithm or an AI or any kind of software based system and get rid of them. In human beings, that's very difficult to do. So I'm not as afraid of bias in AI as long as we're all on the same page that we want to work those biases out. Um, because humans have bias, and that's probably why AI has so much bias. It was trained on us. I think that the majority of the internet being European and American and not having as much of a global representation is problematic when that's the only thing AI has really been trained on. Um, it's just a huge question, Don. I'm sorry, I don't have a definite answer.
No, like I was interested in your opinion and some insight. So when you're working with a company, a nonprofit, or you see a prospect, what is it that you utilize in your assessment, or how does a company, when they work with you, or you, how do you know a company's ready for AI? Maybe that's really the question again. What do you do when you have a prospect or someone calls you or contacts you? What are the top 3 or 4 or 5 things that the company or the solopreneur or the CEO, founder, what do they need to have ready for the checklist to say, okay, you're ready for AI or you need AI?
I would say the first thing to do is identify your early adopters and your champions, right? So that goes back to that whole shadow case. I know that there are people in every organization who are using AI, unbeknownst to their bosses if they're not supposed to be using it, and kind of willy nilly if nobody really is really paying attention to it. You're never you know from change management, you're never going to make big change without identifying some of your champions and then having top down support of that change. And those champions can really get things rolling if you empower them to do so. And then so at that point in time, I would say, like, who's using it in your company that you know of? If I was talking to you and you were asking me,
Mhm.
first I'd say, what do you do with it? What's your experience been like what interests you in this? Is it just headlines, or is there something that that you really want to do? And if it's more along the machine learning or something outside of large language models and reasoning models and things like that, then I might refer them to somebody, to a tech company that knows more about that kind of thing than I do. But if we're meshing and we see where this system could go, then I'm going to say, okay, well, who in your company is using it? And then my next question is always, do you have a policy? Because if you don't have a policy, that's not a good thing, right? If your policy is telling your employees, yeah, I don't care if you use Chat GPT to help you out, just don't put any IP or or patient data in there or whatever. Well, not everyone in your company probably will understand that, and they definitely might not follow that just because they heard you say it one time. It's not top on their mind, right? So to protect yourself and help them have an understanding of what that expectations are, you need a simple policy. And I'll tell everybody something right now that I I know lots of people love to charge to make those. The policy that we have at Phoenix Paramedic Solutions, which is about 5 pages long, I had Claude write. Then I sent it to someone who's at a high level at Purdue University in cybersecurity and AI. And he added one paragraph to it. Other than that, said, "No, this is perfect." So you don't need McKinsey to come in and write an AI policy for your small business. You could probably have AI do that for you and start that conversation with your employees. And then it's a matter of, let's bring some design thinking in here. Like what are we trying to solve? Who are we trying to solve it for? What does a win look like? I think you really have to Those are the questions that I think don't get asked. I also have done some event design training. So the design process, I heard you mention Scrum. The 7-step design process is awesome for anything that you really want to be successful. But it's also a very daunting process. And a lot of times the company doesn't want to stop and take the time to go through a
Mhm.
full process to see whether or not launching something is the right thing to do. I would say AI is pretty expensive. So spend some time figuring out whether or not this is what you want to do, or identify a low hanging fruit that you can use $20 chat GPT subscriptions to just tinker around with this stuff and see if it's going to work for you. But before you invest any money, make sure this is a good fit for your organization, and make sure that you have at least enough people in your company who are willing to buy in and participate, and then make sure that you have top down, not just top down mandate, but people respect, they watch what the C suite does more than they listen to what the C suite has to say. So your
That's
top
true.
leaders need to be in there too.
That's very true. So do you ever tell a company that they're not ready for AI, or you prefer not to work with them, or when do you decide that it's not a good fit for you?
I would say, and I'm fairly new to this, so I would say I have never told anyone that. I have referred people to other more technical. So if they need software, if they're ready to do AI and they're ready to do it at a fairly large scale, if they're ready to, I think that a lot of these small to medium sized businesses going forward, right? Eventually, what it's going to look like is they will take the information from an open source model like a Meta Llama or something like that, draw that down into a proprietary model that they actually have someone build out for their business that can then be within a security wall, and then deploy that throughout their company. That's a little higher level than I have any capabilities around. So if the one company that I talked to that was really at that level, I was like, wait a minute, I have some people that let me connect you with, because I'm not going to waste your time and pretend I'm something I'm not.
Okay, so lastly, how can somebody reach out to you and work with you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. So I love LinkedIn. I'm a huge fan of LinkedIn. Jason Padgett on LinkedIn. Or the email is fairly long, but Jason at phoenixsolutionsgroup.org.
Did I forget to ask you something that's really important that you want to share? Is there a project or something we need to know about that I didn't hit on?
I mean, we have a in-person workshop coming up, but it's in Lafayette, Indiana. So if there's anybody out there in the greater Lafayette area listening, starting April 18th, next Friday, we're doing a 10-day AI for Business intro course.
Okay. Well, hopefully you will hear that, those of you in Indiana. And I'd like to thank Jason Padgett for being here on Pivoting to Web3 podcast. And we're shaping tomorrow together.
Thanks for tuning in to Pivoting to Web3 podcast. If you're a developer, innovator, or AI expert with insights to share, or if you're looking to partner, let's connect. Visit MitchellUniversalNetwork.com and be part of the conversation. Want more content? Check out my playlist for more episodes. See you next time.